Welcome to Heroes That Help, brought to you by the Missouri Department of Mental Health through the Disaster Response State Grant, funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Heroes That Help are conversations with the heroes that respond to disasters, natural and man-made, that wreak havoc every year in Missouri. I'm Tom Steever. The impact of natural disasters goes beyond damage and physical injury. There is mental suffering among those recovering from disaster-related trauma. This compassionate caution from the Missouri Department of Mental Health. Some of the information we discuss in this visual radio series may be distressing or traumatizing for some people. If you need help, we encourage you to reach out to supportive people. There is help available through behavioral health services, including treatment for mental illness and substance use disorders. Today we're talking with Ann Bax, who is the President and Chief Program Officer for United Way of Central Missouri. Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
Ann, let's talk about United Way of Central Missouri first. What do you do there, and what does the organization do?
Yeah, so United Way of Central Missouri is one of over 1,200 United Ways in the world. And so our United Way is here in Central Missouri. We serve 9 counties. And through that, we work with health and human service agencies to address really the full spectrum of needs in our community. And then the other thing that we do, we're very immersed in mobilizing volunteers to serve our community, and we look for gaps in service. And when we see gaps that are something that we stay in our lane and make sure that we're not getting outside of our lane. But oftentimes things come up in the community that there's really no one that's addressing. So not that we can always fix them ourselves, but we look to our agency partners in the community. We look to faith-based groups. We look to community partners, and we just try to bring people together to have those conversations to try to address those needs.
Sure. A lot of people wonder, or they may be wondering, is United Way a governmental agency, quasi-governmental? Tell us, what is that situation?
Great question. So we are not affiliated with the government at all. We're an independent organization, and all of our funding is raised through the community. And so half of our year really is dedicated to fundraising. We are getting ready. We are actually in the middle of our campaign for 2022 to raise $2.3 million, and through that. We have 28 typical partners that we work with that rely on us. Probably over half of those could not continue to exist without the United Way partnership and the funding that comes through our partnership. But then because we have such great community support and we have been meeting our campaign goals for the last 20 plus years, we've been able to do additional one-time community support grants anywhere from $250,000 up to $400,000 a year. Just over the last 3 years, we raised, in addition to that funding for the campaign, for our ongoing work, through the disasters, we raised $350,000 through the tornado disaster recovery and relief, and then through COVID, another $175,000. So, and put those right back out into the community. And we've been able to put about $1.4 million back into the community in grants, in additional grant funding besides that typical funding for our partners.
Well, let's talk about that. You mentioned tornadoes for one thing, but what types of disasters would United Way help to respond to? Well,
we always were told that there would not be a tornado in Jefferson City, Missouri, because we were between the river and the hills, and that was not true. So, certainly when the tornado hit and the flooding that is more prevalent in our community, when those type of disasters occur, we respond. And so there had not been a disaster like the tornado, to my knowledge, for many, many, many years. And so United Way saw our role at that time really to be that frontline responder. We had people, we could not accommodate all of the people that were calling and walking in our office wanting to help, which was a great problem to have. But I'll never forget that morning. We were all a little bit just shell-shocked, I would say, and we had been talking about putting on paper our disaster plan, and it was always, we were going to do that, next week or next month, and always we had a plan and that we had visited with other United Ways about. So we had a framework, but we just had to spring into action. So first and foremost, we had business partners. Central Bank most specifically reached out to us and said, how can we help? And we needed people. And so they loaned us about 5 people for about 2 weeks to help us greet people as they came in the door to donate, and people that called on the phone wanting to volunteer. So, right out of the after the disaster, people wanted to go out in the community and help, but it wasn't safe. There were downed lines everywhere. So, ironically, our board president, Chip Webb, is also leads Ameren in our community. He's the director there, and so Chip and I were on the phone immediately, and so. He said, we need time, and so that was the communication that we needed to give to the people that were calling. But we had a platform, a volunteer platform, so anyone that called or came in the door, we had them sign up on that platform, and then we told them as soon as it's safe, we will send you an email. So the tornado was on a Wednesday night, and Saturday morning, Ameren and their partners had the community safe. And so we sent an email, and then we had a volunteer management center set up at the mall, and everyone went there, and we started deploying them out into the community.
It's obvious that United Way is an important part of responding to a disaster. How would you describe United Way's role in all of this?
Gosh, that's a great question. I would say basically servant leaders. Again, never really knowing exactly what your role is going to be. There's no definition, I think, that I can really explain it, because it's different based on the circumstance. We have a volunteer platform, which I mentioned was used during the tornado, but we have upgraded that in the last year. We're very proud of it because about 450 United Ways use it. And so people can, of course, the challenge is to make sure you keep it fresh with opportunities. So that's Hannah meets with our agencies quarterly to make sure that is kept up to date, as well as it doesn't just have to be our agencies. It can be any health and human service agency. It can be a school, but of course they have to be approved. We need to maintain the integrity. But if you want to volunteer on Saturday from 2 to 5, you can go to the website and you can log in and you can see all the opportunities, and then you sign up and you get an email confirming. The agency gets an email confirming, and so that is made. We really see volunteerism as really our responsibility to try to help with that in our community, and through this platform has made that so much better. So we're really proud of that.
I'm going to have you think back to the 2019 tornado, and we talked about the role of United Way in this, but let's talk specifically about response after that tornado hit. How would you describe the role of United Way specifically responding to tornadoes? So
again, we immediately set up we put the word out to the community that we were the volunteer coordinators, and so we were able to get that message out. We also we quite quickly were several of the and I can't remember at the time now who it was, but reached out to us to ask, about the donation management. So we needed to establish a donation management center. And so, again, we kind of are set up for figuring that out, but at this scale was new to us. So SEMA, Deb Hendrickson, reached out, and we got to talking about how should this look, and she asked if we could work with our business partners to help get this put together. So they reached out, SEMA reached out and asked the Adventist from, it's a church up north, and they had helped do donation management for Joplin. So that kind of tells you their expertise level. And so I was put in touch with the gentleman, the pastor that was going to be responsible for our community. He came in town, and we just started, he just basically laid out what we needed. We need a building that fits these requirements. We need, they laughed at me. I thought it was a pump jack, but that really wasn't what it was called. And I was calling our business partners, asking them if they had these things and who could help us, and finally figured out I was asking for, it was it was not a pump jack. It's what you crank up the pallets with.
Okay.
And so I'm not sure what it's really called, but we just started calling people. We called the factories that we work with in the community, and if they couldn't help us, they sent us to someone else. And that was the beautiful thing about our community. And it wasn't a new thing to me, because I will say that even before the tornado, our community is so giving and caring. But certainly during the tornado, you didn't just have someone say, "I can't help you." They would say, "We don't have that," or we don't know how to get that, but let me refer you to someone else." And so we helped to get the donation management. We found a church that let us use their center, and we just the center it was up and running, and that was for donation to receive donations, because our boardroom in our basement filled up in 3 days with water and food and cleaning supplies, and very quickly we knew that was not going to suffice. So we were able to work with Capital West Christian Center, and they gave us their event center, and so that was for receiving donations, and then for those individuals impacted, and that was for them to come and receive supplies. And so that was one of the primary roles that we played, was to assist, because the Adventists, they knew how to run the center, but they didn't have the relationships in the community to really get the center up and going. So that was our role, and we worked in that capacity through October, and then in October, the usage of the facility had gotten to where most people had been served. So, but we still had a lot of donated items. I think we brought in about $700,000 in donated items, and anything from mattresses, and there's an organization out of, I don't even know where they're out of, but it's called Goods 360, and you can buy pallets of supply or materials that come out of, like when they refurb a hotel. So it's beds, and it's but we had new mattresses, obviously, but bed frames and pictures and kitchen items, toasters and can openers, and just anything you can think of that you would need to start a home with. And so all of those things were in the donation center. And so when the center needed their center back, and we were ready to kind of downsize a little bit, we then moved over to the mall. The mall let us have a smaller space for some of those items, and then all the food and the cleaning supplies, most of that was distributed into 4 different agencies, took that, and those were more centralized to the disaster, so within walking distance, because we couldn't find a facility with the needs that we had in the line of the disaster, and that was unfortunate, but it still served. People got there, and we had transportation from the churches that brought people out there. So the donation management was a big role we played, and then the volunteer piece, I kind of spoke to that, but again, we couldn't manage all the people that that wanted to help. And so once we got Ameren told us the community was safe, then we worked with so many different groups that helped us to mobilize the volunteers. Groups that come in, Rubicon, Samaritan's Purse, that came in, and they know how to mobilize. They knew how to take the volunteers. We brought the volunteers to them, and they took the volunteers to the sites, and they kept them safe while they helped to clean up the debris. And we had the community cleaned up in a couple of weeks, again, with the leadership of those volunteer groups that's what they do. They come in, and it's amazing. And so the volunteer piece and the donation management were the two. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we set up our own, we set up a disaster response and recovery fund. And that was just, people came to us and said, we want to donate. And within a month, probably, I would say, $350,000 was raised, and we committed to the community. That is money that will go 100% back to this community.
It occurs to me that in the case of the 2019 tornado in Jefferson City, that it pays that the United Way is well connected.
Absolutely, and always, again, when any need that comes up, it's not the United Way that we just have. We know the people. We know the people that can help and are willing to help, and it's so many business partners that are always there to support this community and individuals. It is an amazing, it's I always said it was heart-wrenching but heartwarming. Some of the hardest days of my life personally, because when you see people whose lives are torn apart, but heartwarming to see the response.
Let's talk about you personally. What have you experienced in the line of responding to disasters? What have you experienced as far as emotional trauma personally and distress personally?
Well, ironically, that disaster actually impacted me personally in that my father-in-law was in the direct line. And he had been in his basement, thought the tornado had passed, and went upstairs, and the tornado hit his home. And he was knocked down, but thank goodness he was okay. But he called... we knew that night that he had been hit. So my husband and his brother all got in their cars, and we knew, it wasn't really safe for them to be on the road, but they got to him, and safely got to him. But there were tractor trailers turned over in the highway. There were downed lines. He lives out in rural close to Brazito, and so he. Thank goodness was okay, but he was able to communicate on his cell phone. So that next morning, I knew I needed to go put on my United Way hat, and that was of utmost importance, but I also knew that my father-in-law needed help. So thank goodness for wonderful family and friends. They were all there working on trying. His roof basically had kind of been lifted. The roof was still half on, half off, but they were forecasting a lot of rain, and so trying to salvage what they could. And so there was a lot of work to be done. And so I had that personal guilt, I guess, or anxiety that I should be there helping him, but knowing that my job was to help the community. And so that was tough, but also just from the United Way perspective, taking out, knowing, thank God he was okay. And so that was first and foremost, but knowing that what he had been through and knowing that he needed everyone's help, that was hard not to be there those first days. But so many people, of course, family, and then so many friends just came out and had his place cleaned up, but they had to take his house down because it was structurally unsound. But he's resilient, and he has faith, and he's doing great. But then from the United Way perspective, that next morning again, it was almost like. Where do you start? How do you put that? What's the first thing we need to be doing? And your mind is reeling, and calls, coming in, and what are you doing, and how can we do this? And so again, to the point that I talked about Central Bank, and we tease what Matt Tollerton was as an amazing United Way supporter, and he's with Central Bank, and he was the person that he just came over and helped us personally, and we said Matt kind of helped us think straight, because he could kind of remove himself from some of it, but yet still knew United Way well enough and our community enough, and so many other people too that just came and helped us. But thank goodness we have a strong team, and we just knew, it kind of became very clear. We knew, as I said, we knew the donation piece was really in our wheelhouse, and that was our responsibility, and of course the volunteer piece. So those were the primary things, but there were so many, other things that, the other thing that we did is, that I forgot to mention, about 10 days after the tornado, again, we see ourselves as a convener. We needed to bring everyone together and figure out whose roles were what, and how we could get all the work done as a community. So we have what we call an unmet needs group that actually was formed out of the 1993 flood, and Samaritan Center started that group, and they led that group for years. And about 10 years ago, they asked us to take over leadership of that. And really, it's just been it's a monthly meeting of health and human service agencies, faith-based groups get together and share best practices, needs. Just try to, as a community, try to make sure we're addressing needs. So that was the group that we invited in for at this meeting. And again, we had great help from FEMA and SEMA. They were helping us. We didn't make up what some of the steps needed to be. They helped us say, this is what you need to be doing to move towards recovery. And this is the response, and this is recovery. So we had paper all over the walls, and we said, okay, we're going to talk about short term, then we're going to talk about intermediate, then we're going to talk about long term. So first we said, who can help in short term with transportation? Who can help with shelter? Who can help with food? And so we had about 60 people in our little boardroom that day, and that's how we figured out. We started with the short term recovery group. Then we went to intermediate, and then long term recovery group, which, as I said, is still meeting today.
You mentioned the anxiety that you went through after the tornado, not only from the standpoint of United Way, but also your father-in-law, and thank goodness he came out of this all right. But from a mental health standpoint, how do you deal with that anxiety that you experience?
Yeah, because I think we felt like we needed to do it all, and we needed to, you felt such responsibility. And again, seeing your community devastated like that and seeing the faces of the disaster survivors was very, very difficult. But I think how we dealt with it, number one, is we made sure that staff took some time for themselves. We asked for help. We asked community partners to help us. Accepting that help from Central Bank was just the beginning of the help that we got. We also realized we couldn't do it all, and it wasn't appropriate for us to do it all. We have amazing other agencies, faith-based groups, individuals that could help and were in a position to help. And so asking for that help was key to just making it manageable, and also making it, it was appropriate for us as a community to recover together.
So you had mentioned earlier that you were told that it could be 3 to 5 years that this recovery would take. And this just goes back to 2019. So we're still in that time frame. Mm-hmm. What did you think at the time when you were told that it might be 3 to 5 years to recover?
It just kind of hurt your heart, because you thought, we can't do this for 3 to 5 years. You really thought, that initial first few months, you think, gosh, I don't know, this prolonged for 3 to 5 months. But the first several months was when it was you're just figuring it all out and getting the hardest work done. But again, thinking that disaster survivors were going to be experiencing this trauma for that long, that you feel personal responsibility for that, and you think, we're going to get it done faster. That was kind of our mantra at the United Way. We're going to get this done faster, and not just United Way again. So all those agencies around the table that were working together, we just thought, we can do this faster, and we know our community. But a lot of it's out of your control, unfortunately. A disaster survivor has to first go through FEMA and SEMA FEMA and insurance, and that's out of your control how long that takes. And then there's expectations to receive funding from the Long-Term Recovery Committee. We had social workers through Catholic Charities. This is around our. They were skilled in social work and in being case managers. They've done it in other communities, so we were blessed. They were ready to. They became the case managers. They were trained in that. So and there's expectations of the disaster survivors, things they have to do, and in order to receive assistance, and sometimes that's tough because of personal factors. So, but yeah, I can remember saying we didn't want to believe it. We thought we'd get it done in a year, 2 years tops, and it wasn't for lack of trying.
Thank you, Ann Bax, who is the Chief Program Officer at United Way of Central Missouri, one of the important heroes that help when disaster strikes. Heroes That Help is brought to you by the Missouri Department of Mental Health through the Disaster Response State Grant. And that's funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Please, if you need help, reach out to supportive people from the Missouri Behavioral Health Services or another mental health professional. Join us again when we'll talk with another of our heroes that help. Remember, recovery is possible. I'm Tom Steever.